Talk more on the latest polls now, of course, because both the One News Varian and the Taxpayers Union-Curia political polls have the parliamentary centre-left now narrowly ahead and technically sort of able to form a government. Joining us live in our studio for his take on this and the other findings from their poll is the Taxpayers Union Executive Director, Jordan Williams. Good morning, Jordan.
Good morning, Corin.
Talk us through your poll a little bit. The trend here, it does show that the centre-right is struggling.
Yeah, well, I mean, it continues the trend. Something obviously happened over the Christmas break. There's nothing that's more of an economic mirror than a household going through Christmas. And
well, it's very unusual for usually governments would get a bounce over Christmas when everyone's away at the barbecue and relaxing a little bit and perhaps not so obsessed with politics.
When we had our January poll, I actually went back and had a look at that, and there's not a consistent trend that I could find over summer. Of course, there was obviously this bad economic news in December. Even I'm willing to admit that most New Zealanders don't follow public finance announcements as closely as the Taxpayers Union, but certainly, New Zealanders have come back into January and been quite grumpy with the government. And, poll after poll after poll, the message is it's the economy is stupid. Do
you think that it's just that they are the incumbent, that this is a direct result of the weak economy? The unemployment rate, of course, is lagging and now starting to spike up. That is the sole main reason for this? Well,
yeah. I mean, the vast majority of people are telling pollsters that the issue is jobs and the economy. That's not me saying that. That's what the data shows. The other thing that's quite interesting is the last sort of strong poll for the government in December was post the Hikoi and the like, which would suggest that the issue around, or the noise around treaty principles is not so much the treaty principles issue, but the problem for the government is it's very difficult for it to get its economic message through to the public when all the noise is around treaty principles. Look at, step back. What's the best week Christopher Luxon has had in the media over the last 3 months? It was getting out of bed early in January before the treaty principles issue came back up, and he had his economic.
Okay, I think Thomas Coughlan made this point in the Herald this morning. That do you think that National made the mistake of over-egging how much Labour was responsible for the economic malaise, so that now that they've been in for a year, they're having to wear it as well, that they are paying the price of that it was a mixed picture, and so they, it's complicated, but they have to accept now that they are wearing it?
No, I disagree with that. I think that the issue is even worse. It's that they're copping flack on the economy, but haven't done the mahi, the hard work, to actually the necessary reform to get our productivity back on track.
Well, but that would
fix the public finances.
And do you think if they'd have, presumably you're arguing that they should have made more aggressive cuts, a smaller government?
Well, I mean, that's
your position, right?
Well, no, that's the objective fact is, notwithstanding what some taxpayer-funded media describe as brutal cuts, Nicola Willis is borrowing at a faster rate than Grant Robinson, whose spending as both the nominal terms and as a proportion of the economy.
Fine. That's your position, and I understand
in that budget.
That's fine. That's your position. But what I would argue, or you could argue, is if National had gone more aggressively into cutting, made a much bigger attempt, they would have shrunk demand in the economy, and it might be worse for New Zealanders because there'll be less demand and the economy would be even slower.
The size of government, and a very inefficient government, is the key drag, or to use the Prime Minister's term, he likes barnacle, the key barnacle on this economy. Nicola Willis and the government is getting all the flack for currently these brutal cuts, but objectively, look at the numbers. It just hasn't occurred. When in an MMP environment, whenever in a proportional representation electoral system, do you have the Tories with both coalition partners?
I want to push back on that because you're essentially
spending.
Arguing that austerity, a much stronger austerity was needed here, or is needed to deal with the structural deficits. But what I'm arguing, and other economists have argued, is that could have been detrimental as well to the economy, and therefore the polling would be even worse.
No. But you don't even have to argue for austerity. Simply keeping the state the same size as a proportion of the economy would have been an improvement on where we are, not locking in the very explosions in the size of government. Look, the staff numbers we only have until the middle of last year, the Public Service Commission figures, but the few hundred jobs that have been cut, well, the Reserve Bank's growth alone consumes that. no matter what, Nicola Willis is going to face accusations of austerity. And of course, I mean, that's the opposition's job, is to paint the bad picture. Well, the problem for the government is they haven't had the economic upside in terms of getting the books back into shape, meaning that they can afford to take the necessary macroeconomic reforms, such as corporate tax.
Well, let's move on from that debate and talk about the impact of leadership here, because the preferred Prime Minister numbers are worrying in your poll and others for the Prime Minister. How much of a factor is that for a Prime Minister 1 year or so into his leadership to be at 22% and falling? Must be a huge concern. How much of a factor do you think that is in the overall result, and why they are languishing?
Well, I mean, you don't have to be liked to be a successful Prime Minister. Helen Clark and Jim Bolger were never particularly well liked by the public. The difference is, if we look at the Bolger era, is that they did a heck of a lot of work at speed in that first 3 years, and then were able to gain from the economic return. What is particularly worrying for this government is, I'd argue, particularly last budget, they wasted.
But one of the problems for Christopher Luxon seems to be, and we sort of alluded to this earlier on with the Treaty Principles Bill, he's being sidetracked from his key messages, or is he, do you believe, because of the issues around David Seymour, who's we've talked a lot about this morning. Then there's also the New Zealand First and its particular hobby horses that it's railing. They are getting a lot of attention, and is that hurting the overall government result because Luxon is not able to get his message across effectively?
Yes and no. Yes, very clearly, as I was saying earlier, the noise around treaty principles, for which the public, for some people is a very important issue. Personally, I consider it a huge threat to our long-term prosperity, the issue of race-based privilege. However, for the average voter, that isn't the concern. They say very clearly it's the economy. But you're looking at it, as people in politics and media tend to do, through a comms lens. I'd turn it round the other way when members of the National Party complain, well, we can't get our economic message through. Well, that's fine. Get the work done. And if they, if the public's talking about something else, what better opportunity than to actually do the mahi, do the necessary economic reform for which the government agrees needs to be done
maybe
to
they
fix
will
our
argue,
productivity
well, the
problem.
government will, Nicola Willis will, maybe she's listening to this and is screaming at the radio and saying she is doing this work, and they have got their rolling mall, and they are rolling out. They've had a number of announcements. They've had the visa announcements. They've had the investment announcements. The key point here is that the economy is showing signs. I mean, all the forecasters, the major bank forecasters, are saying, look, things are going to improve, that the cycle is going to turn, interest rates are dropping, and that the economy will start to improve.
No, our productivity issue remains, and that's the only true measure of our, whether New Zealand is a rich or poor country going forward. We're still in a structural deficit that hasn't been tackled, and, spend an hour reading those dire forecasts in the half-year fiscal and economic update that was dropped a few days before Christmas.
Jordan Williams, thank you very much for the discussion. That is Jordan Williams from the Taxpayers Union, just following on from the release of their Taxpayers Union-Curia political poll.